Today we're going to talk about an especially deceitful figure that the January 6th committee focused on, John Eastman, and the one single most effective piece of evidence against him. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're listening to No Lie. We've now gotten through 3 of the January 6th committee hearings. I just have to say at the very top that these hearings are remarkably well done. Like with January 6th, we're talking about something that happened just last year and was, I believe, the most documented attack in this nation's history. It would have been so incredibly easy for these hearings to just turn into a regurgitation of what we all lived through and what we all saw during Trump's second impeachment trial. That was my worry going into this. Instead, effectively, everything has been not only new, but perfectly laid out and direct and deliberate and clear and concise. Like, I'm not a lawyer, and these hearings aren't intended for lawyers. They're intended for all of us. And they're laid out in a way that everybody can understand. So I know the conventional wisdom is that Congress is inept, but this committee doesn't fall into that category. But I want to talk about one person in particular today, and that is John Eastman. John Eastman is a conservative lawyer. He clerked for Justice Clarence Thomas in the 90s, which will make perfect sense in a few moments. He taught law and was the dean at Chapman University, although he parted ways with the university after he spoke at the rally at the Ellipse on January 6th. Before he clerked for Thomas, he also clerked for a conservative judge named Michael Ludig. I'm going to get back to Ludig in a moment because his role in all of this is important. Anyway, Eastman started working seriously with Trump in December of 2020. That's after the election was already over. And he had 2 theories for overturning the election on Trump's behalf. The first was that Pence could reject the electors on January 6th and just unilaterally declare Trump president, or Pence could declare a 10-day recess and send what Republicans were calling disputed slates of electors back to the states. And of course, that would then allow for those states with Republican majorities to figure out how to send a slate of Trump electors, even though Biden actually won the election. Now, of course, both of those theories are absolute bullshit. They're completely baseless. They are wholly and unequivocally unconstitutional. Like, if it sounds ridiculous that in our system of government, a system completely and wholly predicated on checks and balances, that the framers would have just casually imbued the vice president with the ability to unilaterally decide an election that he would inherently have a personal vested interest in, yeah, you'd be right. It would be batshit crazy. And even Eastman acknowledged as much. Here is Greg Jacob, Mike Pence's former counsel, recounting his conversation with Eastman on this exact point.
John, back in 2000, you weren't jumping up and saying Al Gore had this authority to do that. You would not want Kamala Harris to be able to exercise that kind of authority in 2024 when I hope Republicans will win the election, and I know you hope that too, John. And he said, absolutely. Al Gore did not have a basis to do it in 2000. Kamala Harris shouldn't be able to do it in 2024, but I think you should do it today.
Yeah, this shouldn't be legal, except when it might benefit us. Convenient, huh? And what's most damning, Eastman knew that his theories on the vice president's role weren't constitutional. Eastman admitted that it wouldn't pass constitutional muster. Here is Greg Jacob again during the hearing. Listen to what he says about his conversation with Eastman on this point.
We had an extended discussion, an hour and a half to 2 hours on January 5th. And when I pressed him on the point, I said, John, if the vice president did what you were asking him to do, we would lose 9-0 in the Supreme Court, wouldn't we? And he initially started it, well, I think maybe you would lose only 7-2. And after some further discussion, acknowledged, well, yeah, you're right, we would lose 9-0.
He conceded that he would lose 9-0 in the Supreme Court with this idea. He knew it wasn't constitutional. Did that stop him and Trump from trying? No, of course not. They did it anyway, which, by the way, is proof of their criminal intent because they knew the truth. They admitted the truth, and yet Trump went out publicly and pressed Pence over and over and over to do this thing that they all knew he didn't have the ability to do. And that wasn't the only illegal idea that he tried to run with. On the night of the insurrection, the night of January 6th, almost midnight, Eastman sent an email to Greg Jacob, Pence's lawyer again, saying, quote, "So now that the precedent has been set that the Electoral Count Act is not quite so sacrosanct as was previously claimed, I implore you to consider one more relatively minor violation and adjourn for 10 days to allow the legislature to finish their investigations, as well as to allow a full forensic audit of the massive amount of illegal activity that has occurred here." So his beef here was that Congress is supposed to debate the states that are objected to for 2 hours. That's the part where both a member of the House and the Senate have to object. They have 2 hours to debate, and they've got to come back. They vote. The vote fails, and they move on. But Eastman's beef here is that the Electoral Count Act had been violated because Congress had debated Arizona's votes for more than 2 hours because there was an insurrection. And so now, what's one more minor violation of an act that was already violated? Like, first of all, to claim that the Electoral Count Act was basically nullified because insurrectionists stopped Congress from finishing its business is like psychopath level obfuscation. But second of all, the guy put down a request to violate the law in an email. Now, I'd mentioned Judge Ludig before, and I said I would get back to him. Ludig is important here because he's highly respected in conservative circles. He is Ted Cruz's mentor. Cruz said that Ludig is like a father to him. Again, Eastman clerked for the guy, all of which made it all the more impactful when Ludig testified at this latest hearing and said this about John Eastman.
There was no basis in the Constitution or laws of the United States at all for the theory espoused by Mr. Eastman. At all.
And here's Liz Cheney reading a short excerpt that Ludig himself had written.
If Dr. Eastman and President Trump's plan had worked, it would have permanently ended the peaceful transition of power, undermining American democracy and the Constitution. If the country does not commit to investigating and pursuing accountability for those responsible, the court fears January 6th will repeat itself. Every American should read what this federal judge has written.
So for that guy, the guy who Eastman himself clerked for, to appear at a public hearing and not only criticize, but sound like a 5-alarm fire about Eastman really does speak volumes. Neil Katyal, who is a Supreme Court lawyer and law professor at Georgetown, he tweeted, "This has to be a nightmare for every federal law clerk ever, having your own judge testify against you in Congress and to have another former clerk ask the questions. I think of the 2 judges for whom I clerked akin to my parents, and every one of the clerks part of my family." Again, just to hammer away at this idea that it is not normal to be publicly dressed down as a singular threat to democracy from the person who's ushered you through your career. So, okay, this guy's a nut job, a dangerous nut job, you get the picture. Here's the final nail in the coffin. After all of this, Eastman then wrote an email to Giuliani seeking a pardon from Trump. Jamie Raskin has called these requests for pardons a declaration of consciousness of guilt. You don't request a pardon if you believe that what you were doing was in any way legal. But of course, Eastman knew that what he was doing wasn't legal. He had told Pence's lawyer that what he was doing would get struck down by the Supreme Court 9-0. He did it anyway. He said that a 10-day recess would violate the Electoral Count Act. He requested it anyway. We know that Eastman broke the law because we have eyes and ears and emails where he quite literally put it in writing. But if the goal is to prove corrupt intent, the January 6th committee has done that several times over. Just like Trump was well aware that there was no fraud, no path to victory, and yet he cried fraud and tried to steal the election anyway. Trump and Eastman were at the heart of this thing. Both of them knew that they were defrauding the people of this country, obstructing a congressional proceeding, whatever charge you're looking at here. They knew that what they were doing was illegal, and yet they chose to do it anyway. Now, consider one last really, really important point. There's a federal judge in California, David Carter, who ruled in March, quote, "Based on the evidence, the court finds that it is more likely than not that President Trump and Dr. Eastman dishonestly conspired to obstruct the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021. And while Judge Carter's case wasn't a criminal prosecution, the Department of Justice could use their ruling to inform its own decision to bring charges against Trump and Eastman for obstructing an official proceeding." So at this point, we'll continue to watch these hearings, and the DOJ will continue its investigation at the same time. And look, I'm no lawyer, but the idea that the DOJ doesn't have what it needs 10 times over is kind of absurd at this point. We know the crimes because we saw them. We know that they were done with corrupt intent because these hearings have shown us senior officials after senior officials after senior officials testifying that they told these people the truth and that the truth was ignored. So Merrick Garland and the DOJ can either choose to defend our Constitution, or they can decide that, you can commit criminal activity so long as it would be too politically inconvenient to prosecute. For the sake of our democracy, I hope he makes the right choice. I've got a great interview this week with the Deputy Director of the National Economic Council, where we talk about the likelihood of a recession, the real reason for high gas prices, who's actually to blame, and so much more. Really one of the most informative people I've ever spoken to. And that interview is available only on the audio version of my podcast. So check out No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.